Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
Hello and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host, Bill Rader, and joining me is my co-host, Sean Kane. Sean, what's going on? How you doing?
Billy Braids, what's going on, my man?
Not too much. We are, so this episode, Sean, I actually was not present for the recording of this episode, but filling in for me was my cousin Leah. So this was the episode you recorded with Jeff Meek. So how did that go?
No, it went good. And I was talking to Jeff. Is great. He's been on our show a few times. He just interviewed so many great people, and he likes to just let them tell the story, and that's what I like about Jeff's reporting. But he did have some really breaking news about an arrest that was made some 20 days after Oswald was killed, which a lot of people don't know about. So we went into detail about that. And that's just unbelievable when you think about it. The Warren Commission, they're saying the lone gunman, the media, the government's pushing the lone gunman theory, and here they make another arrest 20 days after Oswald was killed. So, it's just ridiculous to keep pushing that lone gunman theory. But this was a fascinating discussion. We covered a lot of ground, a lot of different things. Jeff is just fantastic. So, yeah, it was a great interview.
Yeah, he's always a great guest. I always enjoyed having him on. So good. Yeah. All right. Well, without further ado, here is Sean's conversation with Jeff Meek.
All right. So no Bill today. So I'm here with Lee, and we got Jeff Meek. And Jeff, I want to talk to you about your new book that's out now, the JFK Files, Pieces of the Assassination Puzzle, Volume 2.
Yes.
So how you doing?
Doing pretty good. Yeah, I've been busy, still doing some interviews, and as you know, I also write for George Magazine.
Right.
Had some articles turned in there. The one that is due this week, had an opportunity to meet President Reagan's Marine One helicopter pilot. So I did a story on him,
wow.
His experiences with the Reagans. So it's busy writing for the paper, writing for George, trying to keep up with all the declassification.
Yeah, there's a lot of news with that. So let's start with your book. I want to start with the first thing is the story about this this fellow Russell McLarry, and this story about how he was arrested, what was it, 20 days after Oswald was killed, right? And
yeah, a couple of weeks after Oswald was murdered, it was said that he had made a threat to the president, and where he was working was near the Trade Mart.
Wow.
And so they hauled him in, and it was kind of strange how he even came across his name. This was quite a while ago. I was looking at a CIA document. It was dated December 30th, 1963. And in that document, it mentions this Russell McLarry. And I was able to find him and call him. And at first, he was not too friendly. And, he asked, who the hell are you? And so I told him, I said, I live in Illinois. I'm a school teacher, and I'm interested in the Kennedy assassination. This was years and years ago.
Right.
So we talked about it, and he said, no, I never did make a threat. But they hauled him in and they fingerprinted him and they did all of that. And, he went to court and had to post a $2,500 bond and, was eventually released. But, he said they tried to tie me to Oswald. So I found it the most interesting part, the weird part is that they would see anybody, with the government being so case closed, Oswald did it. No worries.
No worries.
X number of days and weeks later, they arrest this guy and try to tie him to Oswald. So that was pretty strange.
That is strange because we know that publicly that they had a case, like you said, case closed, lone gunman, that's it. But we now know privately though, Jeff, that most of the people didn't believe in this lone gunman theory. Even people on the Warren Commission.
Yeah.
The
Warren commissioners didn't believe it either.
No.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing now, who hauled him in and arrested him? The Dallas sheriff?
I don't remember who it was that actually brought him in.
Well, you talked to the deputy
He
sheriff.
was taken to a federal courthouse. I remember that.
Okay.
Where he had posted bond.
Now, what did he denied he didn't know Oswald at all. Did he have a military background?
He did not have he didn't know Oswald at all. He denied everything. He said, no, I didn't make a threat. He said the thing that really puzzled him was that I was arrested 2 or 3 weeks after Kennedy was killed. And he also said, I never did think Oswald did it. That's but the only thing he said about Oswald. And he thinks that that because the Secret Service and FBI was kind of in hot water there in Dallas, that the Dallas attorney, Barefoot Sanders, before he saw the evidence, he was just looking for somebody to prosecute, which again surprised me because the only guy, back then that we knew was being prosecuted was Oswald, and he was dead.
Right.
So in terms of a military background, I don't think I asked him that. So I don't know. Sorry.
So basically, they just hauled this guy in because he made a threat, which they do. They haul him in 3 weeks later, which is interesting. If they just found out about that or what, I don't know. But and then they try to tie him to Oswald when they're telling the public that it was one guy that did it, and that's it.
Yeah.
And here they are trying to tie him to Oswald. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a very strange thing. Another thing in the book that kind of falls into the strange category, like this McLarry thing, in my opinion at least, comes from the Dallas Police Department radio transcripts. And on there, at about 2:04 p.m., there's a call for a wrecker, which, a tow truck, to go down to the Cobb Stadium to pick up a suspect's car.
Wow.
And so it was also stated that the suspect's license number was 3E9087. And Gary Shaw and I kind of communicated together on this one again. And again, this was years ago. But I was able to get in touch with Officer Hill, and I told him it was on the police tapes. And he said, no, he said, that wasn't me. And I said, well, that was your call number. It says you went. No, he denied it.
Wow.
And what Gary was able to find out, here's this, that was 1A. 1B is Gary was able to find the vehicle registration. And we found out that the license number was registered to a man by the name of Clifton Stone.
Okay.
Living at 2521 Waldron in Grand Prairie. And what we learned is the name and the address was fictitious.
Wow.
Didn't exist.
Wow.
So it wasn't long after that I was able to, we were living in Chicago suburbs at the time. And there was a radio program that would have guests on. It's called WGN 720, Extension 720. And Mark Lane was on.
Mhm.
And this was, in 77-ish. And so I got through to Mark Lane, and I told him what I just told you. And I remember, paraphrasing, the host said, boy, there's some knowledgeable people out there that have really studied the case. And Lane said, there are a lot of people out there that are deeply concerned with the killing of our president. And he said, I was unaware of any of this, and I'll bring it up to the committee, meaning the House Select Committee on Assassinations.
Right.
Now, whether or not he did, I have no idea. There's certainly no mention of it in anything I've seen that's House Select Committee on Assassinations related, whether it be their report or their 12
Wow.
supporting volumes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's another strange one.
That's really strange. I mean, the fact that, the name is fictitious and then the cop denies it.
He
I
did.
mean, what was that all about? I mean, that's just fascinating stuff, and that's the first time I'm hearing on that.
Yeah, if I remember right, he said he went out to Ruth Payne's, or he went somewhere else. I don't remember without looking for sure, but if it's okay, let me just peek here.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, he said he was out at Oak Cliff. And I mean, the officers that went to Ruth Payne and the theater and all that, their names are fairly well known, some of them more than others. I never heard of L.L. Hill being out there. And the transcripts said that he went to Cobb Stadium, or was
Oak
sent to
Cliff
Cobb
was
Stadium.
interesting that he would say Oak Cliff, because that's where Oswald was arrested, and the Tippit murders in that area.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's another weird one. I wish Mark Lane could have followed up on it. We had a little more information, but like so many other things, it leads somewhere, but nowhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me circle back to McLarry for a minute. You said that there was a document that you found his name in, and
Yes.
wasn't the Warrensheld also named in that document?
He was.
Did they mention J. Walter Moore, or the CIA, the section chief in Dallas?
I'd have to look at the document. I don't have it in front of me. I didn't really quote from the document, other than that Russell McLarry was mentioned in it.
Okay.
You can go on eBay and see pictures of McLarry being fingerprinted and such. There are
We'll have Bill put one in. We'll have Bill let it in a picture.
Yeah. So you can find them there.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you remember anything about what specifically it said about the Warrensheld in that document?
I don't. I don't remember anything that jumped out at me like, oh wow, I didn't know that. I think I was more attuned to why would Russell McLarry be in this document.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how I learned the name. And when I saw that they had mentioned him as a suspect, I thought, suspect in December? And so I tracked him down, and we talked for, I don't know, probably only about 15 minutes or so. He was very reluctant to say anything at first, but he got comfortable as we conversed.
And it's interesting that the Warrensheld would be named in that article. And just to give some background, because I don't know if Lee's familiar, but George de Warrensheld would end up being a person who says he was, Lee Harvey Oswald's friend. And it was a very, very suspicious friendship, being that Oswald is portrayed as a communist, and de Warrensheld was a oil geologist and part of the White Russian community, which was anti-communist, the exact opposite. And he was part of this elitist society that he even said, like, he would never even meet a person like Oswald. He would later say that it was J. Walter Moore, the CIA, that asked him to take a look and keep after him.
Yep.
So that's relationship was always suspicious. Many people, including myself, believe de Warrensheld was a handler for Oswald. And the fact that, he's mentioned in this same document as this McLarry arrest is really, really troubling, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it is. It's, again, something unexplained.
We will be right back.
Hey, Sean, I want to make sure that everybody knows about our Patreon. I know we mention it every once in a while on the show, but really important that people check out our Patreon. If you go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, or just click on the link in the description, you'll find we do an extra episode every week called The Speakeasy, and it's really usually just Sean and I kind of talking about the day's events, current events, and things like that. But a lot of exciting things. I mean, I know, Sean, you're constantly putting articles up there on our Patreon.
Yeah, and sometimes, Bill, we do bring on special guests. We had Dave Whelan on, we had Scranton Dave, and every now and then we bring Patreon members on. We've had different members, Scott Alfieri, Michael Pilch, Dan Hankey was on. So, there's an opportunity there if you want to come on the show with us. So there's a lot of things we're doing. Like you mentioned, Bill, the articles. I put articles up on a free site, but I also put articles on Patreon that's not available on the free site. We have a lot of times I put up future intel about guests that we have coming up and stuff that we have coming up on the podcast. And we created a great community there, Bill. There's a lot of chat goes on there. There's a community chat and a lot of the comments back and forth. Just the Patreon members always have great insight. So it's a community, Bill, and it's an opportunity for people to join for a really good price, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat it. You can certainly become a free member if you want to. There's also tiered levels with subscription amounts, and just for $1 that gets you everything. I mean, the $1 gets you everything, including our weekly show. There's other tiers. I think, Sean, what is there? A $3 tier?
$3, a $5, a $10. I mean, and there's a $50 if people could afford to give $50.
Yeah, I mean, totally up to you. Once you join, you can make that decision, and certainly, there's no commitment. I mean, you could join for a month or 2 months or whatever you want, and then you can switch your subscription around. Totally up to you. I mean, that's, people love Patreon for that reason. It really is. It makes it easy. It's kind of, however you want to do it, however you want to join. And we certainly appreciate anybody who joins our Patreon and supports the show, because we definitely, Sean, we're not getting rich off of this podcast, that's for sure. But we definitely, appreciate any support that we get from our listeners.
And we also have our merchandise store. If people want to check out, we have the shirt that I have on now. We have mugs up there. We have cups, hats, anything you can do to help the podcast grow. We also have a bookshop up there, Bill, where all the authors that we have on our podcast, we have their books up, and it supports local bookstores, Bill. The money goes to local bookstores, a little bit to us, and then to the publisher and to the author. So it's a real good opportunity instead of buying Amazon and making
supporting billionaires.
Right, sure. There's an opportunity. And as far as Patreon, one last thing, Bill, if you want to join as a free member, we do put some stuff up there for the free members, and then if you like it and you want to upgrade, you can do that.
Absolutely. So definitely check out our Patreon. Like I said, there's a link in the description to our Patreon, or you can just go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, look for our logo, and just fill in the information and you can join. All right. That's it, Sean. We appreciate all of our Patreon members, and we hope that you guys will consider checking it out if you haven't joined. Thank you.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Lee.
Sorry. So in the context, what does that mean? Like, what?
Well, we don't have all the information, from the document. We don't really know what it means, because we don't know what happened why McLarry was arrested. The police, obviously, they're not, the cop that was involved is saying he wasn't him, or no, that was the other one, right?
Oh, that was with the
That was the other, I'm getting, sorry, that was the other, that was the Stone character.
Leah, I don't know for sure. In terms of McLarry, I don't know what it actually means, but its significance is that they arrested someone weeks after Oswald was dead. and
Right.
tried to say McLarry was associated with Oswald.
Right, and they were saying Oswald was the killer, and then they
Well, we're not saying that. I don't, Oswald, to me,
Official in December
the
had the case
official,
all
the official
wrapped up.
story, yeah.
exactly, yeah.
The
Yeah,
official story is Oswald, and they closed the book on it. They're saying, that
Yeah.
one guy did it and that's it. And then here they are making an arrest on somebody else.
yeah, and the document was dated December 30th.
And it's until today. That's the official story. I'm sorry, Jeff, I didn't grow up here, so I lived in Germany. I'm not familiar with most of American
Okay.
history, but
Okay, yeah.
but it's
Well,
that's why
I would like to add that to me,
Leah, don't be upset because none of us know everything. It's too complicated.
it's only the official story by people in the media that keep harping on it. I think most people understand that, that story falls apart. And most recently, if we want to get political here, Trump's liaison or whatever he has for this committee investigating this stuff and the files that are going to be released, she
Task
comes
force.
out and she said that there was at least 2 gunmen. And
Yes,
she said that publicly. So now you have the government. And if you want to go back to the actual investigations, it was really only the Warren Commission that ever said it was a lone gunman. The
Mhm.
House Select Committee on Assassination said a probable conspiracy. The ARB released a lot of files that we know points towards conspiracy. The Jim Garrison investigation that led to an arrest of a CIA-connected Clay Shah was pointed towards a conspiracy. So it was really only the Warren Commission, and the media, like a bunch of parrots, continued to just harp on that it was Oswald, that Oswald did it. But outside of that, most people understand that there was definitely, it was definitely a conspiracy.
yeah, I don't,
That's
to
sorry.
boil it down to the bare bones, I don't think anybody could have done what Oswald is alleged to have done with that rifle they found in the book depository.
Well, that's a good point,
Junk. And,
Jeff,
and
because
one of the other interviews in the book is with Larry Boone, whose father, Eugene, found the rifle.
right.
That was interesting too. His father didn't go along with it either.
Well, there was also Carlos Hathcock, who is widely considered the greatest sniper in American history during the Vietnam War. And when he retired from the military, he tried to recreate the shooting, and he couldn't do it. Now, this is the greatest sniper in American history during that period, and he could not do that. And he himself said that the whole thing is nonsense.
Yeah. That reminds me of another interview. If I can find it quickly. I'm not quite sure where it is in here. Anyway, I also found a fellow through our church by the name of Lee Sanders, who was a Dallas Police Department officer.
Okay.
When the House Select Committee on Assassination was doing the acoustics. And the interview is not very long. He didn't have a whole lot to say. He was just trying to make sure nobody got accidentally shot. But one of the other things that he said in the interview that I thought was really interesting is the people that they had shooting, simulating, were having trouble duplicating what Oswald did.
Right.
Did you see that in the House Select Committee report? Nope.
No.
So the government's official position is still that he did it and that's it.
Well, I mean, it's really a gray area because the part of the government was the House Select Committee on Assassinations. That was a congressional investigation, and they said there was a probable conspiracy. But when the media reports it, they leave out the House Select Committee. They only go back to the Warren Commission. So what is the government's position? And now you have the current leadership saying there was a conspiracy. So what is their position? I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's ambiguous.
Yeah, Lee Sanders told me that, the guys, I guess the other officers, they did not believe that Oswald did it. And that the guys who were trying to do the test firing, Jerry Compton, I'm pretty sure was his name, that they were having trouble consistently duplicating Oswald's shots. And that's also in the book.
The problem with that is when you have shots coming from the front and the back, it's impossible to show them out coming from the back. And that's the whole, single bullet theory falls apart pretty quickly.
It does.
Once you understand the evidence itself, and you could actually, if you actually read the Warren Commission, because I don't agree with Alan Dulles on a lot of things, but one of the things I agree with him is when he said most Americans don't read, because a lot of them don't. But if you actually read the Warren Commission, they kind of impeach their own report when you actually read it.
I think that's what triggered some of the early books.
Yes,
like Jamar and so on. They got a hold of 26 volumes and saw that this is not complimentary to the report itself.
No.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the other interviews in your book, Jeff. How about do you have something, Lee, before we go on?
I'm sorry?
No, I thought Lee was gonna.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Jeff that this was in the 70s, right? And that you were doing all these interviews.
So, no, I did several in the 70s, a few in the 80s, a few in the 90s, but most of them are, I would say from 2018 until now. Like the Larry Boone interview was just a few months ago.
Okay. Can I ask, like, in your book, you're publishing these interviews just without comment, only the interviews that you've conducted, right?
Yes, and that's, I believe, real journalism, which we don't have much of in our world anymore. Everything is slanted one way or the other. I believe that real journalism doesn't take a side. I continue to work for a newspaper, and I remember, and I would write about all sorts of things, public works department and all this kind of stuff. And I would run into, I get to know a lot of people, and they would say, Jeff, I read your article on so-and-so, and I don't know where you stand on it. And I said, thanks, I'll take that as a compliment. And I remember another time a lady at church said, I read your article on the deer hunt, and there were X number of deer that had been harvested thus far. And she said, I didn't know you didn't like animals. And I said, there's nothing in my article about me and animals. What you read is what was said by the committee.
Right.
I don't comment about what was said. And I've been criticized by one person in particular for not saying what I think about certain things. And there are a few times in this book that I do. When I interview James Robinall about Agent Paul Landis, at the end, I tell whether or not I believe Landis. Also in the book, I have included a few of the speeches that Kennedy made back in the 50s because they're so clairvoyant on what happened 10 years later. And I make some comments on that. But for the most part, Leah, I write about what the people said. And the purpose of these JFK Files books, volume 1 and 2, is to provide information to others that I have learned in the hope that it might be successful in your research. 90% of the book it's not about me. It's about what I learned and what other people have told me. And the books are efforts to share that with other readers.
Jeff, do you want to comment on Landis, or do you want to not? We don't have to. It's up to you.
Yeah, I will. I believe Landis. And part of that might be because I hope it's true that's where that 399 bullet came from. But one of the things that he's criticized a lot about is that he brought this up so much later. And it's my understanding that he didn't even know there was a controversy until 2014 or 15 or something like that. And part of what my start in the newspaper was because I started writing World War II veteran stories in a column we called They Answered the Call. And later we called it the Veterans Vault. And I still write it 17 years later. I've done almost 420 or so military veteran stories. And one of the main reasons I believe that Landis didn't say anything is because of trauma. I've met many veterans who never said boo about anything until 50, 60 years later. And I've watched them sit 5, 6, 7 feet away from me crying about things that they witnessed
Right.
or had to do, just to stay alive or to save a buddy or whatever. And so the fact that he didn't mention it for such a long time, I think is understandable because of the trauma. Now, call me stupid or naive. It's okay. I could be wrong, but I really empathy with that because of my experience with those World War II veterans, how they couldn't talk about it. They didn't tell their parents. They didn't tell their brother. They didn't tell their children.
Right.
Until decades, 50, 60 years later. Many of these guys that I spoke to had never told their story before. So I believe Landis.
And that's what I think, JFK was so anti-war because he understood, being a veteran of war, he understood what the violence of war and everything. But to tell Lee, Landis is the Secret Service agent who recently came out, was it about a year now, Jeff, that he came out and he said that he actually found the bullet that could be like the magic bullet and put it on the stretcher, which is amazing. I remember when this story first broke, I think it was Jake Tapper on CNN, and he was telling the story about it, and he said, this doesn't change anything, though. We know Oswald did it. It doesn't change the narrative. And I'm thinking, my God, are you totally,
yeah, it's
so oblivious to what's going on and to the evidence? Like to make that statement on CNN is just, it's amazing.
Yeah, it shows an ignorance of the event, really.
Yeah, it's
follow the party line.
Yeah, unbelievable. Like I said, a bunch of parrots with the same thing.
Yeah.
But let's talk about some of the other interviews. Do you have one you want to go to, Jeff, or I got a couple?
I did a couple of interviews with a fellow by the name of Morris Wolf.
Okay.
I don't know if you know that name or not.
I heard the name.
He was a friend of Warrant Commissioner John Sherman Cooper.
Right.
And he talked to me about working with John Sherman Cooper and how he, as we know now, didn't believe the Warren Commission conclusions. He also knew Arlen Specter, and they played tennis or cricket or something together, but they never talked about it. But Morris's interviews were interesting. He worked in RFK's Justice Department and helped him write some legislation and so on. And he became a courier between the brothers because they didn't trust Hoover.
Yeah.
And so he talks about how, Bobby, Attorney General Robert Kennedy would give him a message for President, his brother.
Wow.
And he'd get on his bicycle and ride over to the White House and deliver the message. And I remember when we got towards the end of that first interview, he said, someday I'll have to tell you about the day I spent in the Oval Office with President Kennedy. And I said, yeah, we'll have to talk about that. So we did a second interview about that and just, what JFK was like and their friendship. And then somehow we got on to CIA Director Bill Colby's death. And he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe it was an accidental drowning.
A lot of people don't.
And, I was trying to pin him down. In fact, I called him a couple more times and he didn't really want to say more. He said, those people don't play fair. So, but yeah, it was kind of weird that, Colby was he knew that waterway well and
Sure.
had it wasn't his first time out there. And then all of a sudden he's found dead. But he didn't want to go into much more detail about that. But that was fun talking to him a couple times. Janet Banister was fun to talk to. Guy's great niece or great niece, one of those.
We're gonna have her on the show in the summer. Probably
Okay.
this summer we're gonna have her on.
Yeah, well, good. She's you know, as she will admit, she's got a lot to learn.
Mhm.
She's very sincere in what she's doing and trying to share information that she learned from her family. And, you know, she's been criticized, as have I, on the interview I did with her for, you know, not including this or not knowing that and whatever. And my feeling is, how can someone be critical of what Janet says that she heard from family members?
Right,
I wasn't there,
right.
you know. I wasn't part of the family. I don't know what Uncle so and so said or Aunt Mary
Sure.
or whatever. But that'll be a good interview. You'll enjoy talking to her.
Yeah, we're setting it up, and there was just some things that we have to push it to the summer, but it's going to be a good one. Could I just go back to Wolf a second though? Could you give some insights of what he said about JFK? Maybe something that people don't know about necessarily about, you know, Kennedy's personality, and maybe how, you know, how driven he was and how he was a sports fanatic. I don't know if a lot of people know that. But did he say anything like that? Anything like insights into him?
You know, I'd have to review what's in the book. My memory, just off the top of my head, is that, you know, he was calm and jovial and didn't act like he was some kind of a big shot.
Right.
He does talk about that, and that's in the interview. Let me see if I can quick find something. Talks about how he and Bobby did not trust Hoover.
No, and with good reason.
Yeah.
With good reason, because Hoover was trying to get a lot of dirt on him. We know that.
I asked,
a lot of bad things.
I asked Wolf if Kennedy talked about other not so peaceful events going on behind the scenes, like trying to assassinate Cuba's Castro. Oh, yes, he did. That we have world problems. Then he went out into the Rose Garden and gave this wonderful comment, which relates to how he saw the Kennedys running Washington for decades, which might have led to his demise.
Wait, that Hoover said he saw the Kennedys running?
John said that about his family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That he saw and that you could have had a Kennedy dynasty. You would have had John 8 years, you would have Bobby 8 years, and then maybe Teddy.
Yeah. Yeah. Ever sit around with RFK and talk about the Hoover-Kennedy hatred? Oh, yes, he did that. He said that J. Edgar Hoover doesn't want me here. He's a close friend of LBJ's. RFK also told Wolf that the Kennedys wanted to drop LBJ from the 1964 ticket and replace him with North Carolina Senator Terry Sanford. And that Bobby sent Morris to North Carolina to meet with him.
Of course, we know LBJ had a lot of issues. He was involved in the Bobby Baker scandal at the time. There was a lot of issues going on. We know that really Kennedy and him never got along. I mean, he basically took him so he could win the South. Let's face it.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason.
Who knows what would have happened to LBJ had JFK not been killed?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a fascinating stuff.
He may have been in jail. Yeah.
Now, what about Jim Gochenaur? Gochenaur, is that how you say it?
Gochenaur, yeah, he talks about getting to know Elmer Moore, the Secret Service,
right,
and the relationship that they developed over the years.
We'll talk about what he said about Moore, because Moore, there's some claims there that Elmer Moore said that are really, fascinating.
Yeah. Again, to be real specific, I'd have to read back through the article, but some of what Moore said with 100% certainty is who did not kill Kennedy being the Russians, because Kennedy was their boy.
He was their boy, and that goes to the Cuban Missile Crisis and all that, where a lot of these guys blame Kennedy, because he looked for a peace answer, and they didn't want that, and they looked at him as a traitor.
Yeah. And it took a while for those two to warm up. Moore and Gochenaur, but I remember Jim said that one time when he was with Moore, Moore had like a satchel or something, and he saw a lot of interesting pictures, parts of pictures in it, and would have really liked to have looked through that. And part of that was the famous backyard photos. And Jim could clearly see a line across the photo through Oswald's chin area.
Wow. Wasn't there an incident with a gun where
Well, I think
kind of threatened them?
The bombshell part about it to me is that Moore told Gochenaur that he received orders to intimidate Parkland Hospital's Dr. Malcolm Perry, and if you don't, I'll ruin you and your practice.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I located Dr. Malcolm Perry's son about 6 or 7 months ago, and wrote him, called, nothing, which surprised me. Maybe it shouldn't, but he Gochenaur said that Moore told him that he was ordered to verbally put Perry up against the wall and say that it was not a frontal wound.
And he was ordered by Kelly, right? Wasn't it Kelly that ordered?
I don't remember if Jim said who ordered him, but that Moore told him that he was ordered to verbally threaten Dr. Malcolm Perry.
Wow.
We will be right back. DK's Corner, now located at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, is serving up the area's best tasting food at respectable prices. Known for our great cheesesteaks, DK's also has delicious breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and catering 7 days a week. You'll love the wraps, soups, and pizza too. We're now open Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Visit DK's Corner on Facebook to see our daily specials, and make sure to follow and like us while you're there. We offer local delivery to homes and businesses, takeout, or come and dine in our new restaurant in Jessup. Call or text DK's Corner at 570-209-0278 or hit us up on DoorDash. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You.
Yeah. Pretty sad.
Really sad.
Also in the book is a lengthy interview with Ricky and Tricia White about Roscoe and what they had to say. And again, we talk about, do I believe Landis? A lot of people don't believe Ricky White.
Right.
And I do believe Ricky White. I mean, I sat there for couple of hours in their kitchen, he and Tricia. I wanted to film it, but they didn't want me to film it, so I audio recorded it so I'd get the interview right. And both of them just came off so real and authentic. And I said, what do you say to people who don't believe you? And Ricky said, I can't help you. I can't help that. I'm just telling you what I lived and what I learned. And here's another reason I believe it. As you know, J. Gary Shaw and Brian Edwards have written about this in the book Admitted Assassin. I don't know if you've read it yet or not.
I haven't read the book, no, but I'm familiar with it.
It goes into great detail that makes you think that Roscoe was a shooter. Well, after the book came out, 2 members of the Dixie Mafia show up in Ricky's driveway and tell him, you better stop talking about it. It was a friend of theirs who was also, that Ricky knew and knew the family that was also in the Dixie Mafia. So if Admitted Assassin is a bunch of garbage, why would they come and say that to him, to Ricky? He wouldn't give me their names. Because I live in the area.
Let me just add something on that, Jeff, because I do a lot of organized crime. And the Dixie Mafia, I don't want people to get confused that's Cosa Nostra and the Italian Mafia. That's 2 separate organizations. This is a more southern organization with more like, say, WASP type individuals that were involved in that, but this CIA and the intelligence operations used the Dixie Mafia quite a bit in different operations, and there's a lot of documentation to back that up.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, they were followed and they were intimidated, and it admitted assassin and sitting there talking to them, they're so unpretentious and believable, and you know, he's just a Texas guy, you know, he's not looking for publicity. I'm not sure that had Gary Shaw not helped me get the interview, he would have even interviewed with me. You know, he was sought after to, Ricky was sought after to come to the conferences this past November, and he didn't go. He had some family commitments. So I just do not see him as a publicity seeker. You know, I don't know that I doubt seriously that he's benefited financially from this. And again, why would those guys show up and say, I know I got his name in here. Let me find it. Philip Jordan.
Okay.
And that's who first came to Ricky in 1979. Philip Jordan was a friend of the White family, and he came up to him and he said, hey, did you know your dad was about to be named as an assassin of President Kennedy? And I think this was right around the time when the committee had heard the acoustics, and they were like, okay, now who could have fired the shots? And Ricky was like, what are you talking about? But then he finds this stuff in a trunk and a canister, and I don't know.
And there was also a story about Roscoe White possibly being involved with the pictures that the Oswald backyard photos were possibly it was Roscoe's body with Oswald superimposed, right?
Yeah, and Roscoe was known to have been good with a camera, and he hadn't been, I think he'd only been with the Dallas Police Department maybe a month or so. So another unanswered question, but you know, for those who have read or will read Admitted Assassin, knowing Gary very well and spending some time with him, he lives about 2 hours from me, and we're also working on a book together right now. But Admitted Assassin is kind of like the tip of the iceberg. Gary said we could have written an 800-page book on this. So,
wow. What about Burt Griffin from the Warren Commission? You interviewed him.
yeah, and you know, we didn't agree on a whole bunch, as you might expect. But
Right.
you know, it was a civil conversation. You know, he does not to this day, I'm pretty sure part of the interview was he does not to this day believe Patrick Dean about Ruby coming down the Main Street ramp.
And we talked to John Armstrong and David Joseph about that, the episode we did with John, and we had that on, and he talked about Burt Griffin not believing that and figuring that out early on.
Yeah. Yeah, he still doesn't buy it.
And Dean was ordered, I believe Dean was ordered not to, or they were ordered not to talk to Dean, right? I believe John brought that up.
Well, I know that I know that right afterwards, Burt Griffin got a phone call from somebody. I'd have to look and see who it was from, and said that they had received a complaint of him trying to intimidate the witness. So he got in a little bit of trouble about it, but you know, that's another thing that's, you know, really interesting. That was part of our talk. Again, I'd have to, you know, I've done hundreds of these. I don't have them memorized, but I do remember that part that he, and that was fairly well known anyway, that he didn't believe Dean.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
What about Robert Blakey, who would end up taking over from Tannenbaum and Dick Sprague and taking over the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
That's a very short part of volume 2 of the JFK files. Again, it's it's a time when I was able to get through to that Chicago radio station and ask a question. And my question was, because myself, J. Gary Shaw, Bud Fensterwald, we were all very interested in a couple of documents that came out, a couple of us believe by accident, about Jean Rene Souetre,
right?
the French assassin,
Yeah.
known French assassin who had been in touch with the CIA long before the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, sure.
Written about in newspapers. I got that thick of a file on him. Anyway, I asked Blakey, did the committee investigate Souetre? And if so, why wasn't there anything mentioned in House Select Committee report or volumes? And backing up just a little bit, I basically read from the document, he was in Fort Worth in the morning, and Blakey would say, that's correct. And in Dallas that afternoon, and that's correct. And our government took him out of the country to either Mexico or Canada. He just kept saying, that's correct. That's correct. So he's verifying the document, in my opinion.
Sure.
And so then I asked him, did you look into this at all? And if so, why wasn't there anything in the report? And he said they did, but time and money was a constraint, and he felt that they did look at it enough to, he didn't use these terms, but to, just kind of write it off. And I was going to ask him another question or two. I can't remember what it is right now, but the host of the radio show quickly changed the subject. And one thing that's always kind of puzzled me about that 1964 document that from the French about, Souetre was here, Souetre was there, Souetre was taken there. And I've talked about this with a couple of other researchers who have an interest in Jean Rene Souetre. We've never seen a reply to the French.
Right.
And I just find it hard to believe that we would have not, that our government would not have replied.
Sure.
So maybe it's a reach on my part, but I just find it hard to believe that we wouldn't have replied. And so we've never seen a reply. So where's that document?
One of the problems I have with that whole thing with Blakey is because here you have him admitting that here's an assassin. He is an assassin, he admits.
He used the word assassin, not me.
Yes, right. So he's admitting it. And he's admitting that he was in Dallas the day Kennedy was assassinated. And then that they didn't look into it because of, what did he say, time constraints or money?
Time and money, yeah.
Time and money. Well, his focus of the investigation was always different from Sprague and Tannenbaum, who wanted to focus on the CIA because of a lot of things that Schweiker said to him about the CIA being involved. In Blakey being his background as an organized crime investigator and prosecutor, he focused strictly on organized crime. So he, anything that was really, away from the organized crime angle, which Souetre would have been, he kind of just goes in the other direction. And that was always the problem with his part of the investigation, in my opinion. That was always the problem.
Yeah.
Away from anything that wasn't organized crime, strictly organized crime related.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, he wrote that book, The Plot to Kill Kennedy, or something like that.
Right.
Which was, all about organized crime. And there are, that I'm really hoping that during this time of declassification, we learn more about Carlos Marcello. He was supposedly, as was taped. And said,
I did an episode on that, Jeff. I just did an episode on our Patreon on that, and I did a lot of investigation to that. And there's actually a lot of that could be debunked on Marcello.
Yeah.
There's a guy, I even found a guy that whole story that Marcello supposedly threatened Kennedy when he says, cut the head off, cut the tail off the dog still lives, cut the head off. That whole thing was fabricated.
Yeah.
Proof. There's a guy that could. So I always think, like, when you and we just did a bunch of episodes on organized crime, and I think a lot of people, they get caught on that rabbit hole. And I think a lot of this documentation, I'm really concerned with some of this coming out, that it's going to push people towards a mob did it angle. And I think there's movies going to be coming out. Al Pacino's having a movie come out about that. And you know this, anybody who's studied this long enough knows that the mafia could not have pulled this off without any involvement from government, CIA, because the
Or
mafia can't get in the autopsy room. They can't, they wouldn't be hiding files for 60 years if the mafia did it.
Yeah.
So I always get concerned when stuff like this comes out.
And I had a fairly lengthy interview with Antonette Giancana,
Right.
Sam's one of Sam's daughters, and she doesn't want anything to do with these movies.
Right. I could see that. And she, last time we had you on, or maybe it was the time before, because you've been on many times on the show, but you said that she believed that the CIA had killed her father.
Yes.
Which I think, you know, there's a lot of fire and smoke there.
Yeah.
Her father was involved with the CIA in plots to kill Fidel Castro. We know that's true, and that could be documented.
Yeah, as was Roselli, who was killed,
Roselli
around that time. You know, she and others, you're a scholar on this. There was surveillance outside their Oak Park home all the time.
All the time.
All the time. She used to wave to him when she'd leave the house and so on, but there was no surveillance that night.
Right. It was taken off.
Yeah.
It was taken off within an hour. He was found dead.
So some agency knew something was coming.
Yeah, exactly.
FBI or local PD or the CIA or something.
Well, it was the FBI that was doing the surveillance, so it would have to. The local PD is not going to tell the FBI what to do. CIA could tell the FBI what to do. So to me, that's, you know, it's not such a stretch to say that's who called that surveillance off.
You know, another thing that she told me was, she said, did you, you know, because her father was supposedly going to go testify. And she said, did you know that I was going to be called to testify?
Yeah, you mentioned
and
that.
I said, no. And she said, Dad put me in a mental institution, so I couldn't go.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that really tracks, like a lot of these old school mafioso, they try to keep their family totally out of it and safe, most of them.
Yes.
And especially, like, you know, the way these old timers like Giancana would have viewed women would have been like either as a wife, a daughter, a girlfriend. None of those would have been invited to a meeting or a sit down or noting.
Oh, so much compartmentalization.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the CIA.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So yeah, there's also, if I can, I know we're getting short on time. I just also want to mention that earlier in the broadcast, I mentioned that I also write for George Magazine, and I've done 6 articles for George that are in issues 19, I think, through 24. They're all out. The second 3-part series focuses on Gaten Fonzi.
Yeah.
And his work. And I spent a lot of time as I was writing it's in 3 parts. His wife, Mary Fonzi, and I spent a lot of time on the phone together. And how that came about was I was going through some of my stuff in the closet, and I came up with that 1980 Washingtonian article that he did prior to his book, The Last Investigation. And it was very lengthy. And I was just reminded, you know, I've read The Last Investigation at least a couple of times.
Me too.
And I was just reminded on, you know, what a fantastic researcher he was, just fearless and so on. And I thought, you know, if George is interested in a story about this guy, I want to write one. But I want to do it a little different, or I want to add another aspect. And that is, what was the man like? What was Gaten Fonzi like? And so Maria was extremely helpful with that.
Right.
And so even those who are familiar with Gaten Fonzi's work will learn things from reading that, because it's there's a lot in there about the man. She talks about how when Schweiker called and wanted Fonzi to do some investigating, because Fonzi had moved from Philadelphia to Miami and thought he could be helpful down there in the Cuban exile community. And she said, you know, just as an example of stuff that's not in the books, she said Gaten hung up the phone and looked at her, and he said, I'm going to help solve the Kennedy assassination. And then we danced in the kitchen. You know, just that kind of stuff, and how he loved to go sailing. And I don't know, I just I did those 3-part things out of respect for Gayton.
Yeah.
And you know, who's long gone now, died many years ago. You know, the Vessiana thing, and David Atlee Phillips and all that, some believe it, some don't. But I really enjoyed doing that, getting to know Marie at least over the telephone. And she sent me a lot of things. She sent me a lot of pictures that I was really hoping we could get in George magazine, but you know, they're very cautious about copyright, and we couldn't nail down who took the pictures.
Right.
I contacted Dan Hardway, Leslie Weiselman, and of course Marie, and trying to figure out who took these pictures, but we never could. We were never sure, and so we weren't able to use them. But yeah, that was fun. That's also in the book.
I would just like to add, you know, for me personally, I think there should be a statue to Gayton Fonzi. I mean, his work and the House Select Committee on Assassination was unbelievable. You know, what he was up against, you know, you had Frank Sturgis trying to lead him down different rabbit holes and get him off track, and just all he was up against. In his book, The Last Investigation, like you mentioned, is so fantastic, with the David Atlee Phillips stuff, the stuff on David Morales that's in that book. I mean, he just really did a fantastic job. And to me, I would put a statue up for the stuff he did. And
Yeah.
as far as even, I know some of the stuff with Vessiana comes under question today. I still believe it personally. I think it stands up. I know some don't, but I believe the Bishop stuff and the David Atlee Phillips stuff, and I believe that.
Yeah, he was you know, just fearless. And she in the interviews, you know, she talked about how, you know, he was investigating other things too, before and after, and that he was just fearless. You know, she also talked about the relationship between Sturgis and Gayton. She calls him Gate.
Right.
And she said that Sturgis just considered himself a friend of Gayton's, and that they would talk for hours, and Gayton would listen to all this BS. But Marie said, you know, there were times that Gayton said that he would find a nugget of gold. You know, it's like reading a book. You know, you know most about what's in the book, but oh, that's interesting.
Well, those really trained black operators like Sturgis, I mean, they're masters of, they'll tell a truth that's hidden between like 5-6 lies. And they're, you know, so it's
part of the trade craft.
Part of the trade craft. But I think Gayton had a really good sense of, you know, what was real and what was garbage. And, you know, and the thing is, you gotta, if you're in his position, you gotta investigate everything that's coming your way.
Yes, to your point, Sean, Marie made the point that, you know, Gayton didn't write something if he hadn't been thoroughly convinced and investigated it.
Absolutely.
And so I don't want to call them allegations that David Atlee Phillips was Maurice Bishop, because I believe he was.
Yeah,
wrong.
I do.
But you know, when David Atlee Phillips' brother Edwin,
I was gonna say
that looks like my brother.
Yeah, and the nephew too. The
showed
nephew
it to his secretary, and boy, that looks like David. And then they showed it to the daughter, and that looks like Uncle David. Okay, I mean, that's pretty convincing.
Yeah,
that's pretty convincing.
Right. And we talked with I think you were on the episode with Paul Blow, Professor Paul Blow. We talked about David Atlee Phillips hits at every touch point. Like he's connected in so many ways to Oswald, and he's in the middle of everything, where it can't be a coincidence.
Yeah, I know, you know, that there are several well-respected JFK researchers that don't believe it. You know, John Newman comes to mind.
Right, sure.
Who I have a lot of respect for, who knows the intelligence world far better than I do, granted. But, you know, Marie said that he never talked to her about it. And I think one of the lines was that she said, you know, Gayton lived this.
Yeah.
Nobody else lived this.
No.
And you couple that to with, you know, the identifications of the family made of David, and just his reputation for just outstanding stellar research, I believe him.
I believe him too. And he was also friends with another kind of hero of mine, Vincent Salandria.
Yes.
And they were close.
You know, you bring him up and you go back and read what Salandria wrote, what, in the mid-60s?
Yeah.
65, 66? And
Right.
what did he write? What did he write? That it was the government?
It was the government, it was a coup.
Kennedy was a traitor. Kennedy
Right.
was this, Kennedy was that. And here we are 55, 60 years later. And that's where the research points. And Salandria was saying this over half a century ago.
And there's a YouTube video, I don't know if it's still out there, with somebody interviewed him. I want to say it was in the 70s maybe.
Mhm.
And he talks about specifically Alan Dulles and James Angleton and specific CIA usual suspects. But the way that Salandria talked about that, and how I believe he was talking to his dad that weekend, and he said if Oswald lives, then maybe he did it. But if something happens to Oswald, we know immediately then this was a conspiracy. And as soon as Oswald was killed, I believe he said to his dad, he said, there you go. It's a conspiracy.
Yeah. You know, another thing, I can't remember, another well-respected researcher that I've either listened to or talked to lately brought up an interesting point. You know, if Oswald would have lived, would anybody have believed him? If he said, if it led to, you know, the government, you know, because back then, especially before the U2 incident in May of 1960, people didn't question their government. The government wouldn't lie to me.
Right.
You know?
Sure.
So that, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this was great, Jeff. I didn't, we kept you here an hour. Is there anything else you want to add? Anybody in the book that we didn't talk about that you want to just mention?
No. I think people, you know, like I said, the point of the book is to get information, in some cases, firsthand, or at the worst, secondhand, and write it up accurately. They're almost every one of those interviews is recorded that I quote accurately. And I just enjoy interviewing people. To me, the most interesting things to write about are people. And I enjoy interviewing people, and apparently I'm pretty good at it. And the purpose of the JFK Files, Volume 1 and 2, is to share. You know, it all started in the newspaper. You know, this once a month column that I still write called the JFK Files. And it was Chris Gallup, who I'm pretty sure you know.
Sure, absolutely.
Said, Jeff, why don't you put them in a book so it gets wider distribution? I thought, well, that would make sense. And so that's why I did the books.
And we would like to thank our sponsor, Gracious Day Grains. Sean, you like to eat healthy, don't you?
Always, buddy. I try to eat healthy as much as I can.
Yeah, and there is nothing healthier than what they call like farm to table, right? So when you can get something right from the ground and make it and then put it right on your table. And Gracious Day Grains, they have a tremendous selection, and it's totally organic. Everything is, you know, they don't use any sort of herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. They have a bunch of different products on their website, Gracious Day Grains. So if you go to graciousdaymilling.com, you'll find a bunch of great stuff there, Sean.
Yeah, you will, Billy. And it's owned by Tom Maxey, who's a great guy from Virginia. He's a truth seeker, just like me and you, buddy. And Tom's growing philosophy follows the wisdom of farmers of centuries past. And a quote from Tom is, if we practice the right rotations, we exclude the bugs and weeds without needing herbicides or pesticides. So, I mean, this is great, Billy. I mean, what he's doing is fantastic.
There's cornbread mix, there's cornmeal, popcorn he sells, buckwheat Sean, have you had buckwheat pancakes?
No, buddy.
Oh my, they're delicious. I love buckwheat pancakes. And Gracious Day Grains sells buckwheat pancakes. Just go to their website and you know, you'll be able to find all of this stuff there. You can order it right off the website. You can find out all about how they farm and their whole philosophy. Tom's philosophy is great stuff.
It really is, Billy. And one of the things he does is he grinds small batches at very low temperatures, which retains the flavor and the freshness.
Of course. And it can't get any fresher than that. I mean, it's literally right from the ground. So again, go to graciousdaymilling.com and just, take a look on there. You can order whatever you want and they'll send it right to your door. Again, it doesn't get any fresher than that, right from Tom's farm to your door to your table. So
absolutely. And eat healthy and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. I wish I could do that. I wish I could eat healthier, Sean.
Well, start with Tom's stuff, buddy.
I'm going to order some of those buckwheat pancakes. I love
There you go. I'm going to try them too, Billy.
Yeah, they're really good. All right. Gracious Day. We thank Gracious Day Grains for their sponsorship.
Thank you.
And, you can agree with what's said by G. Robert Blakey or James Robinall or Larry Boone or Ricky White, or you can disagree.
Right.
I don't go into that. I write it for others so that they, like me, can learn.
Well, I always appreciate your work, Jeff, and it's always a pleasure to have you on our podcast. Lee, is there anything you want to follow up with Jeff? Ask him.
A million things, but that would.
It's Lee.
Go ahead.
It's a case that leads everywhere and nowhere.
Yeah, so I haven't had time to really dive into it, but maybe you'll have to make an episode, the JFK assassination for dummies, with me, because this is so many names.
Dropped a lot of names. There's a lot of names that we're dropping in.
Yeah, and boy, Lee, the names we've talked about are just barely the tip of the iceberg. I'm telling you, it just.
To me, it sounds like the CIA was involved in it, in everything.
Yeah, it points.
I believe that the CIA is definitely covered up because I believe Oswald was involved in some sort of intelligence operation.
Agree.
And they don't want that exposed. I don't think the CIA sat down at a table with operatives to plan the assassination of Kennedy. I think it was more of a rogue kind of thing. But, even Winston Scott, who was station chief in Mexico City, has said, there's an operation going on of some kind, and I don't know what it is. And he's the chief of station. I mean, he could smell something going on in Mexico City,
right,
and he wasn't told about it. So again, there's that compartmentalization.
And see, Jeff, that's one thing I think I brought up on that episode with Professor Blow, and you were on, when he mentioned rogue too. And what I always push back on that is, I don't see these guys as rogue. In the sense, when I think of rogue, I think of a dirty cop. When you look at these operations, you look at guys like Angleton and Phillips and Richard Helms before he was director. Harvey, yes. They were doing a lot of things. They were doing operations, and they weren't telling, McCone had no idea of a lot of this stuff that was going on when he takes over as director. So he's not approving. I don't even think he was briefed on MK Ultra. They didn't even tell him about MK Ultra. So a lot of these operations are going on that are official CIA operations, but even the director doesn't know. Even Angleton, Angleton's SIG unit and his mole hunting and stuff. He wasn't giving out information to director, what was going on. McCone didn't know a lot of the stuff that Angleton was doing. And the same thing with Harvey and Phillips and these guys. Maybe only Alan Dulles would have been the guy that would have been kept in the loop. And even Alan Dulles, I think even when Alan Dulles is fired by Kennedy, he's more in the loop than McCone is as official director. You know what I'm saying? So
yes, well, he kept the CIA apprised of what was going on the Warren Commission.
Absolutely.
And he made it clear that an agent isn't going to talk about this kind of stuff.
They said it's their duty not to.
Their number one thing, their pledge is to the agency.
Right, protect the agency.
Not to some nosy congressional committee.
Lie if you have to, but protect the agency.
Absolutely. Yeah, and maybe maybe rogue isn't the right word, but again, I don't think as an organization that anybody killed Kennedy. I think it was elements, and maybe
I don't think there's
that connection with people like Harvey, who was working with assassins. We know that. He was
Right.
executive
Lives
director.
rifle.
There's
Right.
that nexus between those types and the Cubans who are trying to kill Kennedy, and did the mafia have a shooter involved? We'll probably never know, but it's somewhere in that nexus that this happened.
And the thing is something like this is not going to be on paper.
Correct.
It's not going to be an official,
Yeah, if you're looking for that, if you're looking for that in this declassification episode, you're wasting your time.
Right. But there's a lot of things in those declassification files that, to the title of your book, the puzzle, is pieces that you could put into the puzzle of stuff that we already know.
Yeah, and that's one thing about the declassification of these 7 folks that are on the task force. I wonder how much do they know? I mean, are they going to know the significance of a particular document and how it might feed into another?
Right.
That's a big question. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's important. I mean, we've got 7 people who've got some authority,
Right.
but what do they know?
Right.
When Anna Paulina Luna talks about there were 2 shooters and all this and that, I mean, she's learning a little bit. I wonder if she's getting it off of podcasts like yourself or JFK Facts or something.
Well, didn't she also say she wanted to interview the autopsy doctors, which would have been a good trick because they're all dead.
Yeah, they're dead. So yeah, I mean, one of the members on the task force is Brandon Gill, who is our representative here in Texas, where I live.
Like, are they going to know the importance of the document?
Does Ehrlich Burleson, Lauren Boebert, do they know anything about the assassination? Do they know what they're looking for?
Like a document on George Joannides, would they understand the importance of that name?
Yeah. Well, great point, Sean, because the Assassination Records Review Board didn't know.
Right. And Blakey didn't know. Blakey didn't know Joannides involved, and he got snookered.
They didn't know the significance of George Joannides, and that was back in the mid-90s. We
Right.
probably still wouldn't know if it wouldn't have been for the efforts of Jefferson Morley.
True. Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, anyway, thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. This was fantastic, and we'll have to have you back, buddy.
Okay. Anytime.
All right.
Love your show.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
Bye-bye. Bye, Lee.
Bye-bye.
That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.